From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, Afterlife Communications with Psychic Readings. In a moment, Neale Donald Walsch joins us with his latest work, God Talk. Here's what's happening. 4 people have died in an Alaskan blizzard. In just 48 hours, over 2 feet of snow fell on Alaska's largest city of Anchorage, breaking 2 daily records. The city's daily snowfall record was smashed on Wednesday when 9 inches of snow fell in 24 hours. It's really coming down out there. Israeli tanks took up positions at the gates of Gaza City's main hospital, the primary largest target in their battle to seize control of the northern half of the Gaza Strip, where medics say patients have been dying in that hospital. Gaza Health Ministry spokesperson says that inside the hospital, 32 patients have died in the past 3 days. Nearly the entire population of the state of Maine has fallen victim to the latest Move It hack after the personal information of 1.3 million people was stolen by criminals. First reported in June, the global Move It breach, in which hackers exploit a zero-day vulnerability in the file transfer software, has affected companies and government agencies on both sides of the Atlantic, including banks, universities, insurance, and healthcare providers. Our expert on the Internet, Lauren Weinstein, with us. Lauren, first of all, what does Move It mean?
Yeah, well, let's back up a little bit here. This is really one of those tip of the iceberg type stories because, indeed, pretty much everyone in the state of Maine got hit by this one, which is, you say it, it's hard to believe it while you say it, because reportedly it does affect 1.3 million persons in Maine, and that's quite close to the total population of the state. And this was apparently various government agencies in Maine that were affected, so the type and amount of data involved for any given individual will tend to vary. But yeah, this is one of the latest revelations about a massive related set of exploits going back to the middle of this year and perhaps even earlier. It's just that the folks in Maine are finding out about it now. In their case, the actual exploit in Maine apparently dates back reportedly the last May. But this is only one of perhaps thousands, some of them very large, that have been hit by the same exploit, which does involve software called Move It. This is a software tool from Progress Software, and if you've never heard of Move It, don't feel bad because it's not really consumer software, but it's used by vast numbers of enterprises and government organizations to move data files around, presumably securely. That's the concept anyway. There are long and rather impressive lists available right now on the net. They're easy to find, listing the various organizations, agencies, and firms that have been hit by this Move It problem to date, and the enormous total numbers of people involved, which overall massively dwarfs the numbers just in Maine. And there are various estimates of how many billions of dollars this is costing up to this point and likely well into the future, because the full extent of the exploit and how many different targets are involved now doesn't seem to really be publicly known yet, and it's probably continuing to grow. If you're interested, do a search, see those lists of numbers. But from our standpoint overall right now, at the moment, those specifics are somewhat less important than the painfully obvious fact that even though we constantly preach about keeping your data secure, practicing safe computing, all the rest, we've talked about this frequently right here on the show over the years, there's only so much that any individual can do, because even if every consumer does everything absolutely right themselves in these respects, they can still be hit by systems and software operated by firms and other organizations, government agencies that themselves are exploited. And indeed, in this case, it was that massively popular enterprise software system. Most people have never heard of it, that's used in trusted environments, affecting enormous numbers of people. And despite any individual's best efforts, they're still at the absolute mercy of these situations when things go wrong. And there's pretty much nothing that consumers can do about it. So this is where we are right now, almost a quarter of the way into the 21st century. Welcome to the future.
You got that right. And why Maine, Lauren? Why Maine of all states?
There are other states, too. That's just one among the various ones that have been hit. Anything that was open that they could get at, they got at. But as you said at the top, it's not just in the U.S. It's mostly in the U.S., but other countries too, various states, all kinds of different government agencies. I believe these numbers keep changing as more information comes out, but I believe I saw something about close to 60 or 70 million people perhaps affected. It's a little hard to tell because some of these different attacks probably overlap. The same people may be hit in different, in the different exploits. But it's an enormous number of people, tens of billions of dollars probably of cost involved in all this, and it's still continuing to grow.
All right, my friend, we'll talk to you next week. Well, they say keeping secrets is good for you. According to a study, hiding positive news makes you feel more energized and alive. Whether it's an engagement announcement, a new job, or even a lottery win, we often want to share good news as soon as possible. But keeping secrets, at least for a little while, could actually brighten your day, according to new research. A team from Columbia University recruited more than 2,500 people to take part in their study, which involved a series of experiments. How about that? Keep secrets for a while. What's going on in the skies these days? Let's check in with Dr. Sky, Stephen Cates. Hey, Stephen, how are you?
Doing well, George. We begin in space, as always, as we take our journey here weekly. A little update on the Voyager spacecraft and some interesting facts. The twin spacecraft, George, Voyager, have been in space, we know, since 1977, and they're among the farthest man-made objects ever sent to space. We know that. On Earth, the Voyagers are on their two time capsules in the form of the Golden Record. It's an archive of both images, sounds, and poetry of the now 8 billion souls which inhabit our planet, number 3, the Earth. But think of it this way, George. The 8 billion number is so large to our human minds that if you started to count to 8 billion, one number per second, it would take you 253 years to finish the count. But going back to Voyager, equally impressive is the fact that Voyager 1 technically left the solar system in 2012. It's powered by the atom, plutonium-238. And this particular power source will stop powering the thermoelectric generators by the year 2030 or so, and they're still going on. But the signal from Voyager, George, is about 1/millionth of a billionth of a watt and takes over 18 hours just to receive here back and forth. But on the Voyagers are the golden records, the voices of many, President Carter of days gone by, average people, music of the world, so much more, with special cover art to protect the people of Earth's resume. For what? Any intelligent society or civilization among the stars that may find it. But equally impressive, if you were on the Voyager, the location of the sun is a bright star below the foot of the constellation of Orion. George, we move on to cosmology, how the universe might have been created. There may have been a second Big Bang, but according to some astronomers, don't take for granted that the Big Bang was a singular event back 13.77 billion years ago. Now, a new concept is taking center stage, which states and claims that this is incredible. Just after the first Big Bang, there may have been a dark Big Bang, particles trillions of times the mass of those that make up normal matter. And this might be the creation of what we call dark matter. What is it? The mysterious particles that are thought to hold galaxies together. And George, the second Big Bang is thought to have occurred minutes after the first Big Bang, when cosmic inflation stopped, creating this new quantum field of dark matter. But to confirm all this, we need to search for evidence of ripples in space-time and the fields that are in quantum physics. Closer to home, we find out the first evidence of a missile being shot down in space. On October 31st, during the ongoing Israeli-Hamas war, an Israeli Arrow 2 missile, George, shot down a Yemeni rocket made by Iran at the Kármán line. What's that? 62 miles above space, where space begins. This is documented as the first in space actual shoot-down of a missile in space warfare. We wrap it up with the live sky. The distant planet Uranus now comes to opposition today, truly a binocular and telescope object in the constellation Aries. Uranus, you may know, has 27 moons, 1.73 billion miles away from the Earth. The new moon, hard to believe, George, that an annular eclipse occurred about a month ago. This is the start of lunation 1248. And to wrap it up, the Leonid meteor shower will peak during the morning of November the 18th. Look to the eastern sky before dawn. Hopefully you can endure the cold weather and may see a few. More information at theskylive.com. We love emails, drskyshow@gmail.com. And what do we say? Always remember to keep your eyes to the skies. Simply, I'm your navigator on the highway to the heavens. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you, Dr. Sky. Well, years ago, he brought us Conversations with God. Neale Donald Walsch is joining us again with his latest work, God Talk, next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Neale Donald Walsch is a modern-day spiritual messenger whose words continue to touch the world in profound ways. With an early interest in religion and a deeply felt connection to spirituality, Neale spent the majority of his life thriving professionally, yet searching for spiritual meaning before experiencing his now famous conversation with God. The Conversations with God series of books have emerged from those encounters and has been translated into 37-plus languages, touching millions and inspiring important changes in their day-to-day lives. His latest work, which we'll talk about tonight, is called God Talk. Neale, welcome back. How have you been?
Hey, I've just been great, George. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here with you again. I hope you've been as well.
Yes, sir, and it's always great talking to you. For the benefit of new listeners, take us on the journey that happened a long time ago that created Conversations with God. What happened?
You know, I was struck, George, by what I call the triple whammy at one point in my life. This is now around 30 years ago. What happened was that, first of all, my relationship with my significant other had come to an end. It was not filled with anger or hatred. It was an amicable ending, but it was an ending, and it was very sad for me because we weren't just pals or live-in partners. We were married, and my wife and I simply decided that our relationship wasn't working any longer, even though we had children together, and so we were going to live apart. Okay, that was number one. And it was bad enough for me to endure that because I was not happy with the ending. But, George, 5 days later, I lost my job.
Oh, my
not
God.
because I was not performing well. As a matter of fact, my boss said, of all the people I hate to lose, you're the one I would really hate to lose. But you're the last in, so you're the first out because we got corporate headquarters telling us we need to downsize, we need to lose some overhead, and you were our most recent hire. You have no seniority, so we have to let you go. So now I lost my relationship and my job within the same 5-day period. But wait a minute, the world wasn't done with me yet. Within the next 5 days, three days after that, I'm driving down the road, going to an appointment to maybe to get an interview for a job. I thought, I'm going to get this job. I've got all the qualifications. I'm just right for it. They're going to hire me. Never got to the appointment, George. An elderly man, he was in his late 80s, made a left turn in front of me as I was noodling down the road and smashed into my car. It wasn't a small little fender bender. He totaled my car and almost totaled me. I wound up with a broken neck. They rushed me to the hospital, of course, and I remember to this day the wording on the exam, on the X-ray exam. It said that I had suffered a 3/4 inch avulsion fracture of the 7th cervical vertebrae posteriorly. George, a 3/4 inch break in my neck is big enough to put a pencil through. We're not talking about a hairline fracture. We're talking about a major, major break in your neck, 3/4 inches wide. When I woke up, of course, they put me under painkillers immediately. But when I woke up from the painkillers, the doctor looking over the table I was on said to me, "You understand, Mr. Walsh, that 8 out of 10 people who suffer the kind of injury you've suffered do not live through it. You managed to escape death. But it's even more interesting than that. Those who do escape death are usually certainly paralyzed from the waist down.
Jeez.
You managed to escape that as well."
Somebody wanted you alive, Neale. Somebody wanted you around.
And the doctor looks me in the face and he says, "What do you intend to do with the rest of your life? Because you've been given an incredible gift, a 1 in a million gift." So I thought, okay, I get it. But things went from bad to worse, George, if you can imagine. I was living in a little studio apartment that I took when my wife and I agreed that we would just live apart. But I had no income now. And after about 3 or 4 months, my savings ran out, and I had no way to pay the rent. So I was evicted, and I had nowhere to go.
Oh,
I didn't want to go. I called my wife, who is soon to be my former wife, and she said, "Please don't ask me to take you back in. It's just not working." I said, "Okay, I'll work it out. I'll work it out." And I thought, okay, it'll be a couple of bad weeks. I'll just live on the sidewalk. I'll make it outside for a couple of weeks, and I'll find a job somewhere. If I have to go to a grocery store and get a job packing boxes, whatever, I'll find a way to make some money. George, nobody would hire me because I'm wearing a Philadelphia collar. That's a therapeutic device that you wear to hold your head up. And everybody who I was applying for jobs with were just ignoring me and not hiring me. Finally, the fifth or sixth guy said to me, Mr. Walsh, I got to be honest with you. Nobody's going to hire you while you're wearing that therapeutic device around your neck because we're all clear that one wrong move, we're paying your medical bills for the next 4 years.
That's right.
We can't afford. Yeah, he said, so we can't afford to hire you. Now I can't find work anywhere. George, I wound up living on the sidewalk for 2 weeks shy of a year. 1 year of my life, sleeping on the concrete, going from person to person with my hand out, asking, could you spare anything? And I can recall some of those conversations, George, because you never really know what it's like until you live outside like that for a year. You can't get out of the weather. You're sleeping on the concrete. If you can find a stretch of ground where nobody's going to ask you to leave, you're lucky. No place to use the bathroom. You got to sneak into the nearest fast food restaurant and hope you can sneak in and out to use the facilities. And you're asking people for money. And, some guy says to me, all I've got is pocket change right now. I just came from the bank. I put all my cash into the bank. And I said, you know what, sir, if you gave me 2 quarters, it would be a fortune to me because if everybody I asked today gave me 2 quarters, I could actually eat something by the end of the day. So by golly, he reached into his pocket and he gave me his pocket change, about 75 cents worth. And that's how I learned what it was like to live without any income and no place to sleep, no place to use the bathroom, just be by yourself on the sidewalk. That went on for a year. Finally, at the end of that, I did get a little weekend job at a local radio station. I was ironically, George, you'll appreciate this. I was a talk show host.
I love it.
On the radio. And I had been in broadcasting for many, many years. I wasn't new at the game. I had been, but I had just been hired by the radio station where they laid me off. So now I'm without work. But a local radio station had a little ad in the newspaper, and I was sleeping on newspapers. This is a funny story. I was reaching into the trash bins all over town, grabbing some newspapers wherever I could find it, because if I could lay it down on the ground, at least I could have a little bit of insulation between me and the dirt. So I would be lying on these sheets of newspaper, and I saw, as I'm lying there, I'm looking at the want ads. I'm looking at the newspaper, and here's a classified ad. Weekend, it said weekend talent needed at a local radio station. So, of course, I raced to the phone. I didn't have any money with me, but I actually begged, believe it or not, begged some money off of another person, another panhandler living in the park where I was living for a while. I said, if you got a dime, this isn't the days when you could make a phone call for a dime.
Yeah.
And he gave me a dime, and I said, thank you, I love you, Bal. And I called this radio station, and I got an interview, and I went to the radio station on foot, got there after about an hour's worth of walking, told the guy my story. He saw that I was good at what I did. He said, can I ask you to do a live read? I said, sure. He threw a couple of commercials across the table at me. Of course, I read them. I've been doing radio work for years. He said, okay, obviously you're a pro. You're hired. And so I got a weekend job, filling him as a weekend guy, doing this guy's show from 10 to 2 every day, Saturday and Sunday, while he did his show Monday through Friday. And I was making just enough money to get under a roof again. I managed to get under a roof, as I said, found a little apartment somewhere, could put some food into the larder, thank goodness. And the best part of it all was out of the weather, and I had, believe it or not, my own bathroom.
How about that? At what point did you start writing these notes to God?
Right about, I was finally under roof for about 4 or 6 weeks. And I woke up one morning at 2:30 in the morning, furious with everything, with life, and, if you please, with God. I always believed there was some kind of higher power. I don't know if I called it God or not, but I always thought there's more going on here than meets the eye. So, but I'm furious with life itself. And so then I stomped off into the living room, of this little 2-room apartment. I sat down on the used couch that they had put in there, and I had a yellow legal pad that I was using to keep my lists together of groceries I needed and so forth. And I began writing an angry letter to God, just to get it off my chest, George. It was kind of like self-therapy.
Hold on for a second, Neil. You know what the breaks are like. We'll be right back in a moment with Neale Donald Walsch. His latest work is called God Talk. We'll have him finish his story about how he started conversations with God. Then we'll get into his new work. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Neale Donald Walsch. We'll take calls with Neil next hour. His latest book is called God Talk, which we'll get into in a second. So, Neil, you start writing to God without really any idea that it's going to be turned into a book, right?
Never thought about anything like that, George. I'm just sitting there in my little flat, my little 2-room flat, writing a very angry letter, just trying to get out my feelings. So I'm writing on this tablet. What does it take to make life work? And what have I done to deserve a life of such continuing struggle? And finally, George, I'm writing, tell me the rules. I mean, just give me the rules. I'll play this silly game called life. Just tell me the rules. I don't know what's going on here. What do I have to do to make life work? And then, George, I heard a voice over my right shoulder. I would have sworn someone was in the room behind me. Neil, do you really want answers to all of these questions? Or are you just venting? And I whipped around. Of course, there's nobody there. Now I'm thinking, oh, great, terrific. Not only have I lost everything, now I'm losing my mind. But the voice continued, Neil, give me an answer. What are you looking for here? And I said, if you've got some answers, I sure as hell like to know what they are. I don't know who I'm talking to. I'm sitting there thinking I'm talking to myself. But then the voice again came back as a voice in my mind. It's all in my head going on. And the voice said, you are sure as hell about a lot of things, Neil, but wouldn't you rather be sure as heaven? What's that supposed to mean? I'm writing on the yellow legal pad. And the voice says to me, let me answer your questions. And I'm starting to get answers to all the questions I had asked, and to questions that I didn't even know existed.
And they were good answers too, weren't they?
Well, they were good enough for me. I can't speak for anybody else, but they were good enough for me. And then somewhere along the way, I was told, you will make of this a book one day, and you will cause it to be accessed by many people. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, right, of course. Now I got you. This is what I'm thinking to myself. Now I got, because you got to know. It's the middle of the night, and I'm thinking, I'm making all this up. I'm imagining it. It's just my imagination playing tricks on me. So I thought, if you think whatever this voice is that's talking to me, that this is going to become a book, think again. There's not a publisher in the country that's going to publish a book by a guy who says he's talking to God. I mean, can you imagine the publisher going out to the workroom floor saying to his editors, hold everything, stop the presses. I got a guy here who's talking to God. It's not going to happen.
And he's got it on a yellow legal paper.
It's not going to happen. But you know what? As a dare, I simply was daring God. I took my handwritten notes that I had gathered up to that point, and I sent it off to a small publisher on the East Coast of the United States. You know what? A week later, they called me, and they said, we want to publish this. This is fascinating stuff.
That's amazing.
These answers you're getting are incredible. I don't know where you're getting them from, but these are incredible answers to questions that all of us are asking about God, about life, about health, about children, about parenting, about right livelihood, about how to make your life work, about relationships, about sex, about everything. You've asked all the questions we're all asking, and the answers you're getting are incredible. I said, you really are going to publish this? They said, absolutely. So I thought to myself, it's not going to sell 500 copies. Nobody's going to buy a book by a guy who claims to be talking directly to God and getting answers from God. And I was right. It didn't sell 500 copies.
You were right. It sold
5 million.
Exactly. Now you're into your 40th book, God Talk. Tell me about this one.
Most writers, whatever their topic, they write a book and then they look for a publisher. And that's how it's been with me for the first 39 books. But about a year ago, my phone rang, and for the first time in my life, a publisher called me. And they say, hey, Mr. Walsh, would you be willing to write a book that answers the question? can everybody have a conversation with God? And if there's a way that they could do it, can you think of how you could explain that to people, how they could all have the same experience that you've had? I said, fair question, good question. Yes, I'd be happy to write a book like that if you want to publish it. So I wrote that book in which I included step-by-step instructions on how a person, at least how I think a person could possibly have the experience that I had, that they could access the divine and have their own conversation with God. We decided to call the book God Talk, and then the publisher did something very interesting. They put a call out on the internet, George, and they asked people all over the internet, if you feel that you also have had a conversation with God, or at least that your life has been touched directly by the divine, what we call divine intervention, send us your story. And they told me later that hundreds of people sent stories like that. They picked out the 7 or 8 best stories and put them in the book as part 2 of the book. So part 1 of the book is my story and how I got to have the experience that I've described to you, of course, described in the book in much greater detail. And the second part of the book is the stories of these 7 or 8 people who've had their own experience of divine intervention. Makes for fascinating reading because these are real people from mid-America, from Nebraska, Oklahoma, all over the place, talking about their experiences of divine intervention. A mother whose answers came through a vision of her child, a woman who was reassured about her health conditions, all sorts of experiences of people throughout the country, and a couple from elsewhere in the world. So we decided to call the book God Talk, and it contains a 6-step process that I hope will give people an opportunity to have their own direct connection with the divine. George, let me just add one thing really quickly.
Yeah, please.
Most people say, of course we can all talk to God. I mean, by the way, 8 out of 10 people in the world believe that there is some kind of higher power. Sociologists have taken surveys in the past 10 years asking a single question all over the world. Do you believe in a higher power? And 85% of the respondents said, there's some kind of higher power. There's more going on here than meets the eye. So there's something larger than we know about specifically. We call it God, call it whatever you want, but yes, there's more going on here. So, but we can't agree on exactly what it is and what's really going on. So the real question is, what is happening? What is that all about, and how can we make a direct connection with it? So with everybody, or at least a large number of people, 85% of the people saying there is some kind of higher power, the question comes, can we have a communication with that higher power? I mean, a two-way communication. Everyone agrees that we can pray to God if we think there is some kind of higher power. And most people had at least once in their life called out, oh, God, help me, what's going on, what's going on? So we can pray to God. But here's what's interesting. The world's religions tell us that God will not talk directly to you. In fact, most of the world's religions, of which there are today 4,236 known religions on the face of the earth, this day, not since history began, but on this day of our life, over 4,000 religions being practiced. And those religions teach us God doesn't talk directly to you. You can talk to God if you want. Of course, we encourage you to pray to God. But don't go around saying that God spoke directly to you, because that's blasphemy. That's heresy. That's apostasy. So you're accused of a sin, really. We are of an ecclesiastical sin if you declare that God is talking directly to you. And they put people who say that away on the 7th floor of the hospital in the psychiatric ward.
That's right.
He thinks that God's talking to him.
I used to ask my mother when I was younger, what is God? How did God come about? And she's still with us. She's 94, God love her. And she said to me, I'll never forget it, God always was and always will be. And I kept telling her, I said, Mom, that's not an answer for me. And she kept saying the same thing, always was, always will be. And that's her answer to this day, Neale.
Boy, what clarity. You couldn't ask for a more clear-cut answer, actually. To try to define what God is pointless, because there's nothing that God is not. The first message, George, that I got in my very first conversation with God, she said, Neale, all things are one thing. There's only one thing, and all things are part of the one thing there is. And I'm answering. I said, well, that means that I'm part of you. Are you saying that God and I are one? And the answer I got was, exactly. That's exactly right. God and you are one. Wow. Do I dare say that publicly? Do I dare tell people that God told me this? But, somehow or another, I got away with it. I mean, I put it in the book just the way I received it. There's no editing in the book. The book is an unedited transcript. It's just simply a dialogue between me and my understanding of the divine, in which I was told, basically, in a few more words than your mother was told, there's only one thing. I always am, always will be, and always have been. And there's no time that I will not. And that the same, by the way, George, is true about us. That God said to me, the same is true about you, Neil. You always were, are now, and always will be. That is who you really are. You're not your body. You are a spiritual entity called a soul. And the soul that you are has been with me from the beginning, is with me now, and will be with me forever and ever, and yes, even forevermore.
You mentioned these 6 steps. Very quickly buzz through them for us, Neale.
Possibility, worthiness, willingness, wakefulness, acceptance, and discernment. I'd love to describe those in greater detail one day when we have time, but we have to agree that it's possible that a God exists and that we can talk to God. We have to agree that we are worthy to receive such communication. We don't have to be the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Chief Ulama or the head rabbi. We have to go to step 3, willingness. We have to be willing to receive it, even though religions tell us it's blasphemy. We have to be wakeful. We have to go to step 4, wakefulness. That is, we have to look all around us because God's talking to us in a million different ways across 1,000 moments in every lifetime. Then we go to step 5, acceptance. That is, we don't reject what we're hearing. It's just my imagination, or it's just a coincidence. No such thing as a coincidence. When you get the wisdom from the divine, you will know that that's what it is. And so step 5 is acceptance, and finally step 6 is discernment. Not to fall into the trap of calling everything a conversation with God. That, whatever happens in life, we say, it's a sign. I reached into my pocket to get my car keys, and a $10 bill fell out. So now I have to throw all my money on the ground because it's a sign. So we have to have some discernment. Those are the 6 steps I talk about, and I describe them in great detail in the book, God Talk.
Fantastic. It's an amazing thing. What do you do when an atheist comes up to you and says, I don't believe?
I say, good for you. You don't have to believe. I don't need you to believe. I don't need you to do anything. Least of all, believe anything that I have to say. So if not believing serves you, by golly, step in that direction and always do what serves you. Because if there is a God, that's exactly what she wants. He doesn't want anything else. He wants you to serve yourself and to serve those whose lives you touch in a positive, compassionate, generous, caring, and sensitive way. Do that, and your life will work, whether you believe in me or not. The beauty of God, I wrote a book called Tomorrow's God, and in Tomorrow's God, God tells us, I don't need you to believe in me. In fact, I don't need you to worship me. I don't need you to love me. I don't need anything from you. My desire is to give everything to you, but I need nothing from you any more than you need anything from a 16-month-old child. You don't need the child to do something or to say something or to worship you. You don't need those things because you're very clear that you are not in a position of need with regard to that child. So you are my children, God said. You are my children, and I need nothing from you, but my great desire is to give you the power and the understanding, the awareness and the consciousness to step into your true self, your true identity, which is as an individuation of divinity. You are a part of me. Act that way, and life will change for you forever, as will life on your planet once you reach critical mass in the number of people who decide to respond to this impulse in that positive way.
Neale, is prayer a vehicle to get to God?
Absolutely. Prayer is a wonderful vehicle because it's the beginning of a conversation. like any other conversation we have. Conversations start with one person opening up to another and asking a question or exploring a topic in some way or even sharing an opinion. So, yes, prayer is a very, very powerful device. But we have to be open to the fact that when we pray, we may receive a direct answer. But God's answers are not always simply in words. They come to us in feelings. They come to us in images, in visions, in understandings, even, frankly, even in smells. I mean, fragrances. I'm walking through a department store a few years ago, and I'm suddenly smelling gardenia. And I'm thinking immediately of my mother because that was her signature fragrance.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, my God, I got to call Mom. I haven't called Mom in months. I got to pay more attention to that. I went home, and I picked up the phone and called her immediately. Thank goodness I did, George, because shortly thereafter, she was no longer with us.
Oh.
Now, you tell me that just walking through a department store and smelling gardenia, my mother's signature fragrance, had nothing to do. I mean, come on.
It's not luck, that's for sure.
No, and everyone has stories like that come from their own life. I have never met a person who can't tell you a story similar to that. So pay attention. We're all having conversations with God all the time. We're simply calling them something else. Women's intuition, a psychic hit, an epiphany, whatever we can get away with. Because if we dare say, God spoke to me directly, yeah, people will look at us askance. But, I've gone past that. I'm just telling people directly, yes, you bet. I'm having conversations with God, and the first thing that I ask God in that conversation, my first serious question, why me? Why would you choose me? And the answer I got, Neale, sweetheart, I'm talking to everybody all the time. The question is not to whom am I talking. The question is, who's listening?
Talking to you, Neale, over these years reminds me of that incredible poem, Footprints in the Sand, which is that great poem of that person who was walking in the sand and only saw one set of footprints and got mad at God for not walking with him. And God basically said, child, I'm carrying you.
That's a wonderful, wonderful story. And I love the story as much as you do. That's exactly the way it really is. So we think we're alone out here, and the truth is we're not alone at all. We never have been, and we never have to be. But here's the secret. The biggest problem in the world today is alienation. We're finding ourselves living in a us against them world at a higher level than anything I've experienced in my 80 years on this planet, because we've decided to embrace the notion of separation. I'm separate from you, you're separate from me. We are separate, of course, from God, and everything is separate from everything else. So what God said to me was, Neale, all things are one thing, as I said a moment ago. There's only one thing, and all things are part of the one thing there is. So now I'm starting to see that everybody is part of who I am, and I am part of who everyone else is. That is, to put it in simple language, we are all one. If I treated everyone in that way, my life would change virtually overnight.
That is so true. Neale, we're going to take a short break and come back and take phone calls with you in a moment. Neale Donald Walsch with us. His latest book is called God Talk.